They smiled for the camera, just minutes before stepping into hell. A cigarette between trembling fingers, a letter tucked into a pocket, a silent glance exchanged between brothers in arms, and then silence. These were the final calm moments before chaos consumed everything. Every photo you'll see tells a story the world never got to hear. Until now. In the chaos of World War II, cameras were rare and film was precious. Yet somehow a few moments were captured, brief flashes of humanity, before unimaginable battles began. These photographs didn't just freeze time, they preserved the heartbeat of men who knew they might not see another sunrise. Some laughed, some prayed, some looked straight into the lens, as if staring through history itself. In their eyes you can see the weight of what was about to come, the fear, the courage, the quiet acceptance. In this video, we uncover the haunting stories behind those images. Real soldiers, real faces, real moments before the world changed forever. They say a photograph can freeze time, but during World War II it often captured something deeper, the final flicker of humanity before men vanished into the smoke of war. Each image tells a story, not of victory or loss, but of what it means to be human in the face of death. One such image was taken on the morning of June 6, 1944, D-Day. A group of young American soldiers sat on a landing craft heading toward the beaches of Normandy. The waves slammed against the steel hull and the cold sea spray stung their faces. A military photographer snapped a single frame. 5 men huddled together, helmets tilted low, rifles clutched tight. In their eyes there was no bravado, only the quiet realization that history was waiting for them. Hours later, most of those faces were gone, swallowed by the gunfire on Omaha Beach. The photograph survived. They didn't. Thousands of miles away on the Eastern Front, a Soviet cameraman captured another haunting moment. A small unit of Red Army soldiers prepared to defend a ruined village outside Stalingrad. One soldier, barely in his 20s, adjusted his coat and turned toward the lens. His expression was neither fear nor pride. It was exhaustion, the kind only men who've seen too much can carry. Within minutes, the shelling began. When the camera was recovered days later, the village no longer existed. But the image, that one, frozen moment, became one of the last surviving faces of a forgotten regiment. Then there's the photograph of the British paratroopers before the Battle of Arnhem in 1944. The men stood beside their planes, joking, smoking, laughing, trying to hide the unease that crept beneath their smiles. The camera caught them mid-laughter, unaware that within 24 hours, most would be cut off and surrounded by enemy forces. For decades, veterans would look at that photo and say, that was the last time they looked like boys. War photographers didn't just document history, they carried its ghosts. Robert Capa, one of the most famous war correspondents, once said, if your pictures aren't good enough, you're not close enough. But in World War II, being close enough often meant never coming back. Capa's own images from the Normandy invasion, blurred, shaky, chaotic, captured the panic and confusion better than any report ever could. They weren't perfect pictures. They were real ones. In the Pacific, a photograph from Iwo Jima showed a Marine kneeling in the sand, his head bowed, hands clasped in silent prayer. The battle was minutes away. The photographer later revealed that the man wasn't praying for victory. He was praying for strength to do what had to be done. That picture, later found in his jacket after the battle, became one of the most haunting reminders of faith amid destruction. There's another lesser-known image, a group of Japanese soldiers sharing a cigarette before charging into what they knew would be their final battle. Their faces are young, almost peaceful. No hatred, no anger, just resignation. The photograph, discovered decades later, changed how historians viewed the enemy. It reminded the world that behind every uniform, there were men, scared, tired, and human. In North Africa, a photograph taken during the desert campaign captured a group of soldiers watching the horizon as a sandstorm rolled in. The wide expanse of emptiness stretched endlessly, and their small silhouettes stood defiant against it. One of them had carved a message into the stock of his rifle. If not today, maybe tomorrow. Those words would later be found on his weapon after the battle, his last message to a world he'd never see again. And then there was the image from the Battle of the Bulge. American soldiers huddled in a snow-covered foxhole, sharing a can of soup. Steam rose between them as snowflakes fell. Their faces were pale, lips blue, but they smiled anyway. The photographer later wrote, "They laughed not because there was anything funny, but because it was the only thing keeping them sane." These moments, captured just before battle, remind us of something war often buries: the simplicity of life right before it's taken away. The act of lighting a cigarette, tightening a bootstrap, writing a quick note to a mother back home. These were rituals of men trying to feel alive when everything around them screamed otherwise. Many of these soldiers never saw the photos taken of them. Some were published after the war, others discovered in archives decades later. Each one serves as both a memorial and a question. What were they thinking in that final moment? Did they know what was coming? Did they accept it? Or did they hope for a miracle? Perhaps the most haunting part isn't the photographs themselves, but what they don't show. The seconds after the shutter clicked. The chaos, the shouting, the sudden silence. The moment when these men stopped being subjects of a photograph and became part of history's invisible toll. For us today, these images are more than just pictures. They are windows into the souls of men who faced the unimaginable and still found time to smile, to smoke, to hope. They didn't pose for glory. They simply existed in a moment when the world stood on the edge of collapse. And the camera, almost mercifully, captured them before it all disappeared. Every time we look at those photos, we aren't just seeing soldiers, we're seeing the weight of what they carried. The fear they didn't show, the dreams they left behind, the moments that would outlive them all. Because sometimes the most powerful part of war isn't the battle itself. It's what happens just before it begins. The moment after the camera clicked, that was when time shattered. The laughter faded. The cigarette smoke was swallowed by wind, and the sound of engines, boots, and hearts became one. The battles that followed those calm photographs were not measured in victories or medals, but in breaths, screams, and silence. On the beaches of Normandy, the men from that famous landing craft never stood a chance. The ramp dropped, and instantly machine gun fire tore through the air. The young soldier in the middle, the one with the photo of his fiancée tucked in his pocket, made it 3 steps before falling. His friend tried to pull him up, but the sea had already turned red. The photographer, who had taken that peaceful picture just minutes earlier, kept filming until a bullet grazed his helmet. That image, frozen forever, became a silent monument to those who never made it off the sand. A few miles inland, another camera captured the same beach hours later. The tide had pulled back, and the shoreline was littered with helmets, rifles, and letters floating in the water. Each belonged to a face from those earlier photos. The world would later call it the longest day. But for the men in that frame, it lasted only a few minutes, the minutes between life and legend. In Stalingrad, the young Soviet soldier with the hollow eyes never got to see the city he was defending survive. After the shelling began, the sky disappeared in dust and fire. His unit was wiped out in less than an hour. When the area was retaken months later, his body was found near the ruins of a church, still clutching his rifle. Inside his jacket pocket was a small piece of paper, a prayer written in pencil, smudged but still readable. "If I fall," it said, "let someone remember I was here." And someone did. His photograph, rediscovered decades later, became one of the most iconic images of the Eastern Front, the face of every nameless soldier who gave everything. Far away, in Arnhem, the British paratroopers who had smiled for the camera before boarding their planes were dropped behind enemy lines. Within hours, they were surrounded. The laughter from that photo turned into radio pleas for reinforcements. "We're holding," one voice crackled. "But we can't hold much longer." The photograph, published after the war, became both a tribute and a tragedy. Veterans would gather years later, pointing at those frozen smiles, whispering the names of the ones who never came home. War doesn't care for photographs. It only cares for the moments after. At Iwo Jima, the Marine who prayed on the sand did what he'd asked for. He found strength. He survived the first assault, but was killed the next morning while pulling a wounded comrade to safety. When the camera film was developed weeks later, the picture of him kneeling in prayer was used in newspapers back home. His mother, seeing it for the first time, said, "He looks at peace." That image became more than a picture. It was closure. Across the Pacific, Japanese soldiers prepared for their final stand. The camera that captured them, sharing one cigarette, heads bowed in quiet unity, belonged to a Japanese war correspondent. He died hours later when the American bombardment began. His camera was found in the rubble. Decades later, when the film was developed, the image shocked historians. These weren't fanatics or faceless enemies. They were frightened young men just like everyone else. It reminded the world that courage has no nationality and fear no uniform. In the deserts of North Africa, the soldier who carved, if not today, maybe tomorrow, into his rifle, fought until his last bullet. His unit was ambushed, and only a handful survived. His rifle, with those words still etched, was found half buried in the sand by an Allied patrol. The inscription became a saying among soldiers, a quiet acknowledgement of their shared uncertainty. That one small message, carved in desperation, outlived the man who wrote it. Then came the brutal winter of the Battle of the Bulge. The men in that snowy foxhole, the ones smiling around a can of soup, faced one of the most relentless attacks of the war. They were cut off from supplies, freezing, starving, and yet they refused to surrender. One of them, the man in the middle with a grin half hidden by frost, later recalled in his journal, "We laughed that day, maybe because it was the only thing that still felt human." When the battle ended, 2 of those men were gone. The survivor carried their photo for the rest of his life. The photographers too bore their scars. Many of them didn't make it home. The few who did never spoke much about what they saw through their lenses. One war correspondent wrote years later, "Every time I pressed the shutter, I killed time itself. And when time moved again, the people in front of me were gone." For the world, these photos became history. For the families, they became something sacred. The last glimpse of a son, a husband, a brother, frozen forever in his final calm. Mothers framed them. Wives touched them every night before sleeping. Children grew up tracing the outlines of those faces, wondering what kind of men they had been. And yet, these images carried something more powerful than grief. They carried truth. The truth that war isn't made up of dates and generals, but of moments like these, the stillness before the storm, the heartbeat before the charge, the quiet before everything changes. Each photograph became a story without an ending, because the ending was too painful to capture. But maybe that's why they endure. They show us not just what war looked like, but what it felt like. When we look at those soldiers now, we don't see heroes or statistics. We see humanity, raw, uncertain, beautiful in its defiance. We see men who faced the unimaginable and still managed to stand, to smile, to live for one last photograph. The camera took their picture. The war took everything else. When the war finally ended, the guns fell silent, but the photographs did not. They spoke louder than any victory speech, louder than any marching band celebrating the end of the bloodshed. The faces captured moments before battle became symbols of everything war could not erase: courage, fear, humanity. They reminded the world that behind every uniform, every medal, and every grave, there was a heartbeat that once believed in something worth dying for. In the years that followed, those images began resurfacing in newspapers, memorials, and history books. But to the families, they were not history. They were homecomings. A mother in Kansas, seeing her son's face in a photo from Normandy, wept quietly and said, "At least now I know what his last smile looked like." In Russia, a grandmother would visit the photograph of her brother displayed in a war museum, touching the glass every time she passed, whispering the same words, "You made it home." Photographs became a way to grieve for millions who never received a body to bury. They gave names to the nameless, faces to the fallen, and humanity to statistics. Some were displayed in churches, others in classrooms where children looked up and saw what real bravery looked like. A single photograph could teach more about the cost of war than 1,000 pages of text ever could. But beyond remembrance, these images carried a strange kind of peace. They reminded those who survived that even in their darkest hours, they had not been forgotten. For every soldier who never returned, a piece of their soul had been captured on film, a silent testament to their existence. One famous photographer, when asked why he risked his life to take these pictures, said, "Because someday someone will need to remember." And he was right. Decades later, those moments have become sacred. They appear in documentaries, history museums, and art exhibits, not as relics of destruction, but as portraits of endurance. Some of the most powerful photos from World War II are not of the battles themselves, but of what happened before them. That fragile stillness where everything human still existed. In those moments, war had not yet stolen their innocence. The men still had laughter, fear, and hope. And maybe that's why those photos hurt the most. They are reminders of everything war destroys. Not just lives, but moments that could have been. Generations later, when historians look back at World War II, they no longer just see armies and empires. They see individuals. The young man writing a letter to his mother before the landing. The soldier cleaning his rifle while humming a tune from home. The one kneeling to tie his boot, unaware that someone was taking his picture, and that picture would outlive him by almost a century. Each image holds a message. For some it's bravery, for others it's loss. But for all of us, it's a reminder that history is written not only in words but in faces. When we look into those black and white eyes, we see reflections of ourselves, our fears, our dreams, our fragility. And that's the strange paradox of war photography. It shows death, yet it preserves life. It freezes the last living moment of someone who was about to disappear. In doing so, it defeats time itself. The soldiers may have fallen, but their stories never did. In museums across the world, these photographs hang in silence. Visitors walk past them slowly, their footsteps echoing through the halls. Some pause to stare longer, unable to look away from a face that feels too familiar. Maybe it's the eyes, wide, uncertain, filled with the same questions we'd all ask if we knew tomorrow might not come. Curators often say these pictures don't belong to history alone. They belong to everyone who values the cost of freedom. And when light hits the glass just right, you can almost imagine those soldiers still standing there. Not ghosts, but guardians of memory. In the decades that followed, photography changed. Cameras became smaller, wars more distant, but none ever carried the same weight as those grainy, black and white frames from the 1940s. Maybe because the world was simpler then, or maybe because the faces were real, untouched, unfiltered. Every wrinkle, every drop of sweat, every flicker of fear was truth. There were no retakes, just one shot, and sometimes one life. Even now, digital artists and filmmakers try to colorize those photos, bringing them back to life with modern technology. Yet no matter how vibrant the hues, the real power lies in their monochrome silence. Black and white strips away distraction. It forces us to see the essence, a man and his fate, caught between life and eternity. The soldiers caught on camera before battle did not know they would become immortal. But they were simply living their last ordinary moments, smoking, laughing, tightening straps, whispering quiet prayers. But through the lens of time, they became eternal witnesses to humanity's greatest tragedy and triumph. And perhaps that is the greatest irony of all. They went to war to fight for a world they would never see. But through those photographs, they helped shape the one we live in today. Every time we look at their faces, we inherit a responsibility, not just to remember them, but to learn from them, because memory is more than looking back. It's carrying forward. Every soldier in those images represents a story unfinished. The war took their tomorrow. It's up to us to give it meaning. When we tell their stories, when we study their faces, when we pause in front of their photos and whisper thank you, we give them what they fought for: remembrance. They are no longer just images. They are living echoes of courage, suspended forever between peace and chaos. And so, the next time you see one of those photographs, a soldier tying his boot, lighting a cigarette, glancing at the camera with a faint, uncertain smile, know that you are looking into a fragment of eternity, a reminder that even in the darkest chapters of human history, the light of humanity never truly went out, because though their battles ended long ago, their faces still march through time, silent, unbroken, and immortal.